What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are going to study the miracle of the law of emergence. Very intriguing subject, as well as the psychological pitfalls that we can encounter when we're studying the myriad existential risks facing our species in these uncertain times. How do we deal with the distress, the division, the weight of all that is happening in the world today? Well, we're going to explore that, guys. I hope that this is useful to all of you out there. Thank you so much for joining us once again. If you enjoy what we're doing here, make sure that you smash that like and subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. Throw out some comments. That helps the algorithm more than anything. So I've got a whole slew of clips for us to check out today. This is going to be, I hope, quite intriguing and perhaps even heartening for all of you out there. It's been a rough past few years for all of us. So much going on in the world, so hard to keep track of everything that's going on and to even know what is good to focus on right now. How do we partition our time out so that we are approaching those things that we can actually affect and change? So
Yeah, and
much to consider.
If you're feeling dread in the pit of your stomach, you're not alone. And actually, regardless of the side of the spectrum you are, we're all feeling some sort of dread.
No doubt.
There's dread from the truth, and then there's dread from the quote unquote truth.
Mm.
There's the propaganda, and then there's what's actually going on. So you feel the dread if you believe the propaganda, and you can feel the dread if you don't believe the propaganda, and you're seeing through it and going,
Right.
"Oh my!"
Yes. So when we speak about existential risks, we're referring specifically to what Daniel Schmatchenberger, a game theorist and systems theorist, calls the meta crisis, which is a term for the many existential crises that are simultaneously facing our species and that are actually interconnected and expound upon one another. So let's look at the definition real quickly and a list of these existential crises facing our species. And this is just a small list. There's more than this, but let's jump on over.
Go GPT, go.
So I asked ChatGPT to please provide a list of the existential risks that Daniel Schmatchenberger speaks on. And Daniel is a thinker focused on existential risks and future studies. He addresses a range of the potential existential threats to humanity. And here's some of the key risks that he discusses. One being, of course, artificial intelligence, now being weaponized by the major powers around the world. These are risks associated with the development of super intelligent AI systems that might act in ways that are not aligned with human values or interests, potentially leading to catastrophic outcomes if not properly managed. Next, biotechnology and synthetic biology. The dangers posed by advances in biotech include the creation of engineered pathogens or synthetic organisms that could unintentionally cause widespread harm. In a very short amount of time, CRISPR tech is going to be accessible to just about anyone with like a high school lab level of instruments, and just about anybody could actually create worldwide human destroying pathogens on their own. So not even major power centers like the US or China, but any small groups of people. So how do we upgrade ourselves to be prepared for such a thing? Of course, nuclear war is a long running existential threat we've been experiencing since the 50s. I remember growing up towards the end of the Cold War, and in the 80s in our classrooms, we actually went through a drill where you would like hide under your desk in the case of a nuclear attack, like that was really going to do anything. But I remember that really seared into my memory. So we were all quite aware growing up of the potential threat of the world just ending out of nowhere because some nuke went off and then another nuke goes off, and then next thing you know, the chain reaction occurs and we're all radioactive dust. Climate change, of course, whether it is caused by humans or not, we know that the climate does indeed change on this planet, and that can lead to mass migration and all kinds of issues. So the existential risk posed by climate change, including severe environmental disruptions that could lead to widespread suffering, economic instability, and potential threats to human survival. Of course, global pandemics is an issue that we are all now ultra familiar with. The potential for pandemics caused by natural or synthetic pathogens that could result in severe health crises and societal disruptions on a global scale. Any one of these things can turn civilization upside down. Ecological collapse, risks related to the collapse of vital ecosystems due to human activities, which could disrupt global food supply, biodiversity, stability of natural systems that support human life.
No, so that point I want to just correct also. This is Chat GPT, so it's saying human, but also inhuman. Like if certain microbes grow like in the ocean, they can acidify the ocean and kill off a lot of things too. There was an epoch that was defined by a single-celled organism acidifying the ocean, killing off all the pre-mammals.
Wow.
So
Yep.
like it's still a big thing. Like
Yep.
regardless of whether it's us or not.
Yes, and then technological catastrophes, potential risks from other advanced tech that could have unforeseen and catastrophic impacts, such as uncontrolled nanotechnology or other emerging technologies. And then asteroid impacts. That's a big one. We've talked about that before on this podcast, because for all those that feel that humanity is a cancer to the planet and that the planet is better off without us, well, if you really care about all those cute, fluffy bunny rabbits and butterflies, who else is going to save the planet from the next asteroid but humans? No other species is obviously capable of doing so. And we do have the potential to be great stewards of this planet. We're just kind of failing at that, right? And then, of course, societal and political instability, risks related to the breakdown of global or large-scale societal structures, including political fragmentation, economic collapse, or civilizational conflict that could exacerbate other existential threats. All of these threats actually can build upon one another. Unanticipated scientific discoveries, potential dangers arising from scientific discoveries or innovations that are not fully understood or are mismanaged, which could also have unintended and severe consequences.
And that one actually touches on pretty much, most of those, like artificial intelligence or, bioweaponry or nuclear war. Because before, we had the understanding of biology the way we didn't really realize that we could, well, to a certain extent, we did weaponize it. You put your bullets in your feces and stuff, and then when you shoot somebody, they would get infected.
Right.
That's
Poison
a
daggers
war
and all that.
crime, by the way.
But this is the unanticipated ones,
Well,
so ones that wouldn't make it on this list.
Yeah.
Well, that are yet to even be foreseen by us.
Well, and I could say probably the psychological mental pathogens that are so rampant now because of technology. Ideologies that are catching on quicker and quicker and quicker. Or even pseudo ideologies that aren't even full ideologies. They're just more like mass psychopathies, that just hit us, and we don't even realize. You're on the Facebook for the first starting out, so you can keep track of your friends and families, and then it morphs into this weird addiction to clicks and all this other stuff. We didn't anticipate that'd be such a big thing, but it's a society killer. Well, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the suicide rate has grown exponentially, and it's definitely affecting people, young people in particular. So let's jump on over to our first clip. This is Daniel Schmatchenberger, and here he's going to discuss different motivations for studying existential risks in the world.
There are different facets of self that have different motivations for the same thing. It's very common. Someone will have a motivation to, from a deep part of themselves, to genuinely serve and protect life. Motivation in the cognitive domain to want to learn about interesting and important things. An interpersonal motivation to want to work with good people on an important topic where you feel camaraderie. Some unresolved ego places that want to feel seen and recognized for doing important work. Some unmet needs that need compensated. It's like there's going to be a number of things coming together. So what we're going to look at is some of the ones that can get in the way that are worth noticing.
Yes. So that's just the quick intro, guys. And there are all kinds of different reasons that we get into this stuff. And these are issues that we all face. So I personally, throughout watching this video, I noticed, several things that I've done that are a part of, falling victim to psychological the psychological risks that we face when we're looking at this kind of stuff. But our world is now confronted with it. These are the times that we're in, and we have to look at this. We just have to find a healthy way that we can do so without distressing and depressing ourselves to death.
Yeah.
So he does a great job covering that in this
The
video. And this is from the Stoa. If you guys want to check it out, look in the description under this video, and you can see in the first link the full video here.
Yeah, and there's a issue that compounds all this too, is that we don't really have a system already in place for covering this kind of stuff, or at least we don't have any more. You know,
Right.
like it's our university system doesn't do this kind of thing. Our, you know, we don't have the coffee shop or the bar to go talk about deep things anymore for the most part. Like depending on where you're at, sure, maybe. But
Right.
for the most part, we don't. What do they call them? The third spaces. We don't have those third spaces anymore,
We really
and that's
don't,
where
though.
we would discuss these things and come to an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, where is the appropriate place to talk about religion and politics nowadays?
Well, it ain't at the dinner table. It's not at the bar. It's not at
Not
the
the
coffee
coffee
shop.
shop.
You can't do it in public. So what? Do we got to like hide like Soviet style in our houses and talk real
Or
quiet?
just
so,
argue
you know?
hatefully on the internet?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right.
That's kind of where we're at.
Oh man.
All right, so let's move on, guys. Now we're going to actually look at the different motivators: fear, anxiety, and trauma and things of that ilk. So here we go.
So if you just think about what types of weird psychological dispositions that might be problematic could attract someone to the space of looking at existential risk and catastrophic risk in the first place, you could probably just start to guess them if you haven't already even noticed them, right? So there's a bunch of things that have to do with fear. Someone's fear of uncertainty and fear of just bad shit happening can, of course, attract them, but where there can also be distortion because of that fear that has them weight everything through an anxiety lens. And there's this very interesting symbol grounding thing where it's like, if you feel, let's say that I have a bunch of unresolved fears of the unknown because I had a traumatized childhood where at any moment my parents could behave erratically and in messed up ways. And so I just had hypervigilance develop. Well, I now have an embodied sense of anxiety and hypervigilance, not connected to anything free floating that I've just projected on all. And so things that look negative, like they could go bad, feel true to me because they'll resonate with my existing feelings that have nothing to do with observing reality, but old stuff I haven't resolved. If I see a different scenario where things look possibly secure or good, it won't feel true to me. It won't land as true. I'll be suspicious of it because I don't have those feelings. So there's a place where there's a feeling of truth, no matter how logical someone wants to be, because they can always say, well, that argument looks really logical, but I think we missed something. Where does that I think we missed something come from? It doesn't actually land as feeling true. So I'm going to look at it again versus I hear it initially as a hypothesis. And I'm like, that's the hypothesis I want to go study and see if I can verify because it feels true. So I think people underestimate, no matter how logical they're being, how much the symbol grounding, the embodied feeling ends up being a huge part of it. So fear of the unknown and general fear of uncertainty, making me want to be a forecaster. So I have more certainty about the future, and fear of negative things happening. This is a huge one. And fear of death specifically. And so then I can project my fear of my own death onto the fear of death of everybody. And I'm going to solve my own existential fear of death by solving the death of the world or civilization. I probably don't know that's happening, right? I probably think, no, I'm just being very rational about the fact that AI risk is a very real thing and biotech risk and et cetera. And that might also be true because we're complex creatures with multiple parts operating. But to be both a lot of what's driving and a lot of what creates distortion.
Yeah.
This topic of that I just mentioned about like fear of my own death, so let me solve civilization not dying, can also be like fear of chaos. Say in childhood, family felt chaotic and didn't feel like I could solve that. So I'm going to solve chaos in the world. The projection of our own unmet needs that we actually feel low agency over, and they're too traumatic. So we project them in the world and try to solve them is unbelievably common. Right? Not in this space alone, in all kinds of spaces. And so this is why the Taoist saying, if you want to protect your feet from rocks, better to get shoes and try to cover the world in leather. All of those things around why your own psychotherapeutic healing work is important is because all of you, your knowledge of science, your knowledge of cognitive biases and logical fallacies, and your unresolved traumas and interpersonal issues and fears, all of you will come to bear in how you assess and how you act on the situation. And so as much as you want to develop your cognitive abilities and your knowledge of the technological stack and your knowledge of how to do Bayesian forecasting and other types of good, confidence margin calibrating forecasting, you also want to work on clarifying the grounding and the psychology of it as much as possible.
Okay, that's a good place to stop there.
Yeah, on the fear of death and as well, the fear of death and the combination of having an issue within yourself and then casting it out into the group is one reason why, as humans, we want lots of kids in a dynastic lineage, because the only way really for you to survive, like you won't be able to live forever, but you can have a bunch of children that can carry on either your name or whatever your whatever your dynasty is, what you're doing.
Those good intentions and actions that you're bringing into the world.
Yeah.
That you want to continue to see, you want the world to continue improving after you're gone, and you've put some things in motion that you want to see keep on moving.
Yeah, and that's a positive and a negative. It can inform you as well as it can mess up things. Like, say, in the dynastic end, it's like, well, the good end of that is a good family run business that long after the family member who started the business is done, it continues going with the same family. Well, on the bad end, you get nepotism, particularly like like governmental nepotism and stuff like that, where it's like, well, we're just going to hire within us and keep this pure, and then you stagnate and you don't get the most competent people, and then it starts creating issues of understanding the world.
Really like how he brought in how we can try and forecast to gain some sense of certainty when the world around us is in chaos, and this can stem from our own childhood trauma of chaos going on in the household around us. So it's a way that we kind of project onto the outer world the trauma we've experienced, and we're trying to subconsciously solve that to feel comfortable in the world again. Wanting to solve the outer. And I really like how he also brings into how all of us comes to bear on how we see and experience this world around us. So everything that we've experienced is playing into the greater trauma that we see in the world. That was really good.
No, yeah, and you can see this also in the activist, and I don't mean people who occasionally go out and swing their sign around, but I mean those people that are really driven to be activists. They're trying to really change something that's within their self, but doing it on the whole changing of other people. Well, like Marx did this too, and every tyrant did this, they did this where it's like, there's these, even Freud to a certain extent, he externalize it on to say his patients or his view of society. But really at the core of it, you are trying to deal with something very, very, very personal.
So often the outer is a reflection of the inner, and solving the outer requires us to actually begin to solve the inner within each one of our own selves.
Well, that gets back to the agent arena relationship, that we've talked about during the Awakening series. The agent defines the arena as much as the arena defines the agent, and that idea has been skewed and turned into some pretty crazy stuff. But I still think at the core of what that idea is getting at is true.
Absolutely.
The constraints on the soccer field create a game that makes the soccer player a soccer player. But the soccer field, if there's no soccer players on, it's just an empty field. And if you put a stage on it, now it's a rock arena. So
that's it.
And it's natural. It's natural to do that. Humans have always done that.
The agent and the arena continually reinform one another, and those wars outside are indeed reflections of the wars within ourselves.
Sure.
So, all right, so let's jump on over to the next clip. Now we're going to be looking at how to embody that disposition to focus on catastrophic risk in the world. Let's go.
There's so many people who just really don't think about catastrophes that much at all. They're thinking about positive things. Or if there's negative, oh yeah, I know climate change, whatever, it's a bummer, but their mind doesn't keep gravitating there. Their mind gravitates to what is near term or whatever. There are some people whose mind gravitates to real negative things and gravitates to it so much they can't not try to think about it and figure it out. And then if my mind gravitates towards those things so much that I don't just think about climate change or species extinction or nuclear risk, but all of them, and try to think about X risk as a whole category, there might be a disposition to focusing on the catastrophic that is worth looking at. In CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the main dispositions that messes people up psychologically that they tell you to look at is what's called catastrophizing, right? And in your own personal relationship, he didn't call me back, it means that he dumped me and doesn't love me anymore, whatever. It's like just going worst case scenario with some tiny little thing. And it obviously leads to huge amounts of interpersonal stress and anxiety. And I think it was Mark Twain who made the quote, I've suffered a great many terrible things in my life. A few of them actually happened. And the idea that almost the greatly terrible things that I suffered were just shit I made up in my mind that still suffered from. So the disposition to catastrophize, it's quite possible if someone has that disposition, they're smart and they got some analytical skills or whatever, they might actually be quite good at forecasting bad scenarios and be a good risk analyst. Whether we're talking about for a military application or financial risk analyst or X-risk analyst, they might be better than most people at being able to think through all the bad shit that could happen and then how to think through theory and solutions for how to address it. This is actually a good thing of like how a particular trauma can actually have a gift in it. And this is most of the time, our traumas and our gifts are connected, right? Like whatever difficult stuff we went through often sensitizes us to issues that we weren't sensitive to otherwise. Often in the process of healing it, we come up with some skills that are useful for the world. So this is very common, but it's also true that if we don't heal the trauma, the lingering trauma messes up the gift. We might have a really awesome gift, but it continues to have dysfunction and self-sabotage and whatever associated. And so we want to take the gifts from whatever bad conditioning or trauma we had and heal it enough that we're not still suffering with the trauma, but have the gift.
Yes. Yes, great point there.
Yeah, because it does you no good if you're constantly in your head and you're like, well, that person didn't say good morning cheerfully to me, so they must hate me. Well, that's not really doing anything for you. But if you already have that tendency and you can work through, instead of applying it to like, yourself and everybody hates me, and you can apply it to, okay, what's the worst case scenario that could happen within this circumstance? Like, if you're if you're building a med kit for your car, your first aid kit, you're going to want to think about, some of the worst things that can happen. Now, you can't put everything in that med kit, so you do have to create a salience landscape of like, well, yes, I could have my leg completely brutally mangled and ripped off of my body, so I need to put, well, always keep a tourniquet, but put a bunch of other stuff, and you wouldn't need necessarily to build your med kit like somebody who's in an active war zone, even though you might want to have some plastic bags and tape for like sucking chest wounds and other stuff like that. But also you want to make sure that you have the little stuff too. Like it's not just worst case scenario, but it's worst case scenario and everything in between, and then accurately figuring out the probability for each event. Like, I got a crap load of, finger band-aids in mine because I'm always cutting my fingers. So like I know what's going on, but I also have a tourniquet. I have oxygen canisters for, I'm an asthmatic. So I know what it's like to have your lungs shut down and be hypoxic.
So ways to develop reasonable responses rather than really fall victim to our anxieties to an extreme. I love how he points out that our traumas have gifts within them. That capacity to be very watchful, to have a deep concern and care for the world can actually grant us a high degree of vigilance and a capacity and a willingness to really look at those deep, dark things that do face us as a species. Just finding a healthy way to do that so that we don't crumble under the weight of it all is the real trick that we have to master now, because we are certainly facing myriad existential crises.
And actually, you could see that in like, say, like the case of the tyrannical father. Everything must be clean. Your bed has to be completely made. Say he's like super military father and everything, and the worst, straight-laced, hard-nosed guy you can imagine, but if you can get over the emotional trauma or the reactive emotional trauma of that, I've seen those cases where you have people that actually really have their lives together because just by habit, they have the gift of paying attention to small details, making sure everything's lined up and ready to go, having a proper plan because there was no option growing up. Yeah, it was traumatic to have the tyrannical father, but if you don't let it destroy you, you can learn a few things from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's gifts in all of our traumas. So now we're going to look at how we can catastrophize relationships, how important it is for us to form healthy relationships and kinds of times. Jumping on over.
You have to get to the post-cynical phase. That's critical. So I want my optimism to be a post-cynical choice that I'm going to keep looking for adequate solutions. And
I think I actually jumped a little bit forwards, back.
Let's say I have a disposition to catastrophize. As a result, I can red team the shit out of your project. Tell you that 700 different ways that it can fail from nth order effects. That's quite helpful to think through so that I don't have to actually fail from all of those things, like being able to anticipate them, put some probabilities on them, see how we would test that. That's quite helpful. The question then is, let's say, in order to achieve any big thing, like, okay, how do we create protection against weaponized drone attacks on infrastructure? I can't do that by myself. It's going to take a team to do that. It's a hard damn thing to do. How are we going to harden the electrical grid against EMPs and Carrington events? How are we going to create a closed loop materials economy that addresses planetary boundaries? I have to work with a big team very well to do that. Now, does that same catastrophizing have me catastrophize my relationships where I can't trust anybody? Because I assume that everyone else is either going to make the wrong decisions because they don't understand everything as well as I do, or they're actually badly motivated. Well, seeing where people are badly motivated is a huge part of doing X-risk well, right? Being able to see the game theory and being able to see where people cause problems by accident, which is externalities, unintended externalities. So if I'm really good at seeing the game theory and the externalities, can I also not apply that when that's the wrong tool? I'm like amazing at swinging hammers, but now it's time to cut shit and I'm still swinging hammers. So the best tool is actually totally destructive when it's not time to use that tool. And if it is a tool that becomes a disposition, right? So if you want to do really hard work of this type with lots of people, you have to be able to develop very high trust relationships. So then there's a question of, do you have capacity to do very high trust relationships? That and catastrophizing don't work together well. Also, there's no solving X-risk that means anything without being an optimist in some way. Yeah. Like there's a kind of pessimism I need to think through all the problems, but there's a kind of optimism I need to think that could be a constructive pursuit at all, and that we could actually solve them. And that when I look at the overwhelming face of all the shit that I think about how to actually overcome it. And it's almost like there's an optimism that is a choice that says, I'm going to look for solutions, period. Maybe I fail, maybe I die looking for it, but I'm not going to move into the compromise. I'm not going to ask, are there solutions or not? It's a wrong fucking question. I might get a bad answer to it. I'm going to say, what would it take to solve this? Yeah. Let me understand the design criteria enough. What would it take to solve it? And then, so I'm committed to find solutions and not get stuck. But since I want them to be good solutions that I can believe in as a post-naive optimist, not a naive optimist, right? I go from a naive optimist to a cynical pessimist to a post-naive and post-cynical optimist, right? You have to get to the post-cynical phase. That's critical.
Yes. So you got to get past the naivety. You got to get past the cynicism to be a post-cynical optimist. Because why are we being cynical in the first place unless we recognize there's got to be a better way? I think so. There's an optimism in there.
I think that's what Michael Malice, if you guys don't know him, you should check him out. He's an interesting fellow, but that's what he was getting at with the white pill. We've all heard of the red pill, you're waking up, and then the black pill, hopeless and bitter, no solutions. And that's what Schmatchenberger's talking about here. You can't just be the pessimist. Well, because no solutions will be gained. It'll just be talking about the problems. So you have to get to a point of post-pessimism, optimism, and I think that's what Michael Malice was talking about with the white pill.
Absolutely, man. That's a good way to put that.
Because you can see, you can take the red pill and wake up, and then you can see all the things that you're going to see that would drag you down into the quote-unquote black pill. But you need to move past that to white pill yourself to start to not ask, okay, well, what's, like asking somebody else, like, well, what's the solution you got? It's like, well, what solution can we come up with? What are the options? Give me the options. Yes. Okay, like, I believe we can do this, just not sure how we can do it right now.
And what is the beauty and the profundity that is already here that gives us a reason to care in the first place? We forget to celebrate the great miracle that we find ourselves in, and that we're all a part of that here together. So there's a whole way to orient towards life through, as Bill Hicks, the late great comedian, put it, eyes of fear or eyes of love. How are you viewing the world? how many times in the past 5 years has your heart dropped into your stomach when you've been looking at distressing news,
Oh, every day,
you know?
every freaking day.
And boy, does that beat us up inside, and it changes our disposition, and it makes it hard for us to feel safe and secure in this world, and even to find the hopeful actions that we can make to help change the world, because we're so mired in concern and worry. And it also affects our relationships and how we interact with others. And God, I mean, all of us gotta be guilty of
Well,
this at this point, of letting the stress of the concern for our world get to us, and then we start lashing out at those around us and blaming them and other groups without recognizing that we're really all a part of the problem and the solution.
well, that's where, if you go down that loop, you become you become nihilistic and self-destructive. And yet again, like in the first part or the first clip that we pulled up, oh, what was it? It was let me rewind.
The motivations for studying X risks, or the fear, anxiety, trauma motivators.
The internal and external functions. So like
Oh, yes.
wanting to fix yourself, you got to try to fix the world. Well, if you're nihilistic, it's, well, I'm just mad at the world and all this stuff, and it doesn't matter. We're going to die anyway, and at least the earthworms will get a treat. Well, you'll start treating yourself and then treating people around you like that as well.
Dehumanizing. Yep.
Yep. And dehumanizing another person is bad enough. When you dehumanize yourself, that's when the demons get loose in you. Whether
And then
you
you're willing to make excuses for doing some horrible things in this world.
well, like if you
like the Columbine kids.
The Columbine kids, or well, if you look at pretty much any Marxist that ever gained power, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, they've gotten that bleak black point, and then their solutions are very maniacal and awful, or what's the word, Machiavellian,
Self-destructive and world destructive.
yeah.
Yep.
Because we do try to imprint ourselves on the world one way or another. Whether it, why do you think lovers carve their initials into a tree or something like that? Even small acts like that. It's just, this is what humans do.
Speaking of, relationships, we have to develop trust, great, strong, trusting relationships with those around us that are aimed at helping solve the meta crisis, the meaning crisis being the root of the many myriad crises facing us. How are we going to solve these things together without a great degree of trust? And how do we get to that level of trust without having healed ourselves within psychologically? So there's a lot of self-work that goes into changing the world. That's ultimately what we come to. If you want to change the world, you got to change yourself. And it's an old adage, and it sounds cliche, but it's the truest thing I ever heard, and it only rings truer the more that I delve into that idea, the more that I consider that it really is, the outer is a reflection of us. We are society. There's not like it's separate from us. And we're just here on this evolutionary path. And we forget that we are evolution itself. We are taking part in that strange, miraculous process. And we get to, at this point of being self-reflective organisms, we get to actually help determine where we are going to go as a species. But these are decisions that we must make together from a healthy, loving, considerate place. And we cannot consider anything at any depth or any breadth without having that unconditionality within, that kind of unconditional love that Jesus taught and shared with the world. We must have towards ourselves and others around us, so that we're willing to consider other people's points of views, willing to put ourselves in other people's shoes, even those with who we strongly disagree. We've got to find love for even our enemies in order to understand their motivations and how to find those zero-sum win-win solutions that we're looking for. Let's jump on to the next clip, guys. And
Greater than one sum.
Yes, yes, that's it.
Yeah. Well, real quick about high trust relationships. It's hard to cultivate high trust relationships when you live in low trust societies.
Yep.
And I think we should really, really, really fight tooth and not physically, but like
Put great determination
intellectually,
into, yeah.
spiritually, fight tooth and nail to build higher trust, societies and communities. If you live
Absolutely.
if you live in a good community, keep it that way.
Yes.
Talk with your neighbors, get to know them.
Find the
You
others
know?
looking at these things as
Yeah.
well and forge strong relationships, because these things do magnify and ripple out. The more of us together working on these things, looking at them together, the less scary those shadows and monsters become, the braver, more courageous, and considerate we become. These are very, very complex issues that are interrelating and expounding upon one another. And it's going to take many minds. No one person's going to be able to solve any one of these existential risks that our species now faces. But we are here at the bottleneck. We are here at the divergence, the fork in the road. We have reached some kind of pinnacle of achievement on this planet as an extension of this living planet, the self-reflective extensions of it, that are now starting to wonder how best to manage ourselves to be great stewards and to survive the miracle of life long into the future. So, in a way that is, beneficial for one and all the animals, all of each other. So now we're jumping back over to Daniel. And once again, if you guys want to check out this video that we are drawing from, it is titled Psychological Pitfalls of Engaging with X Risks. X being short for existential risks, with Daniel Schmatchenberger. Find this on the
right. The holy wars were all fought over people's certainty, right thing. Nobody really does great acts of atrocity in uncertainty. So if you have to decide which side to err, it's that I'm certain there are no solutions. Okay, well then we just have to radically depopulate because that's the only thing. Or I'm certain that AI is going to take over. Okay, so we have to figure out how to upload our consciousness to the cloud. So we're going to justify some really fucked up experiments for a while, or how to, whatever it is. So you can see how the solutions to solve that. So if somebody is in the solutions to solve that, so if somebody is in the naive place that doesn't recognize how fucking hard these issues are and how much actual game theoretic nonsense is there, even in the space of people supposedly working on this and et cetera, you're just going to fail and you'll move to this next space soon. If one is in the cynical place, there are real upper bounds on the kind of trust creation and the kind of design solutioning you can really do. So there is a post-cynical place one must be in. To be post-cynical authentically, you have to know that there are other people who are post-cynical. Because if you're cynical, you think trust is impossible. Trust is something that naive people do, right? You think the way Machiavelli would talk about it. And so you think, oh, whoever I trust the most is who I get fucked the most by. So whoever doesn't know who the sucker in the room is the sucker. There is a kind of trust that is post-cynical, where everybody knows game theory because they're like, whether it was this or not, I'll use it as an example, right? We can see the way the Cathars all decided to die together in service of this thing. We can see the way the founding fathers, when they're writing the Declaration of Independence and signing their name, no, they're all signing to be killed if the British catch them in terms of sedition, which also means they're signing to be killed if any of the other guys defect. So what they're doing is saying, I trust you enough that I trust you under duress to not defect on this kind of thing. So any decent rebel alliance or Fellowship of the Ring or whatever has to be post-cynically grounded in a way where there is a transcendent loyalty to the cause that we know each other share, which makes a transcendent loyalty to each other. And so you can't catastrophize your relationships, right? You can't bring trauma into those relationships and have that thing work. Yeah. You obviously have to not be stupid. You have to use really good discernment, but good discernment means not projecting old patterns. It means clear of old patterns, actual discernment.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, catastrophizing works when you're problematizing things. And I don't mean like making things a problem, but figuring out the problem. But it doesn't work for your relationships, like particularly when you're endeavoring with other individuals to make meaning and go past just reason, because reason's not enough. You have to go past reason. And have a whole lot of trust. He was talking about, the founding fathers, like signing that thing. And this is agreement of trust between people without coercion. Nobody who signed that was coerced to sign it. And I'm sure they argued night and day about it, figuring out this is what we want to say. If we're going to be on board, we're going to agree. And that takes a whole lot of like looking forward to the future of what do we want to make of the future. not just like, well, we're getting taxed right now and everything's crap and we hate the king and blah, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, no, we want to see a future where everybody gets
It's got to be a
a well
shared
enough
vision.
shot, and
Yeah.
it has this shared vision that goes beyond just the group of people involved in it as well. Because like a vision can be shared even beyond a group without having directly say, oh, this is my vision, follow my vision. If your vision's good enough, people will have that vision, or if it's compelling enough, whether it's a good vision or not, because we've seen
That's
very
right.
very destructive visions in time that somebody
That ideologically capture us.
yeah, and then lead us towards. But he was talking about certainty,
False certainties.
false certainty.
We can't possibly understand everything in a possibility space, but false certainties are, no one does any great damage in the world without being very certain about what they're doing. So we have to be aware of those, certainty in general. I think we should always be wary of. We should always remain open to new information. And that way we are able to, constantly upgrade to face the changing landscape. Game theory, systems theory is certainly something useful for all of us to understand, because all of these issues that the world faces, none of them are separate from one another. Everything is interconnected. I like how he spoke on transcendent loyalty to the cause. So even though the founders had many points of disagreement, they indeed did share a vision, and they had developed and cultivated a trust among one another, knowing that they all meant well, even if they disagreed on some of the finer points. Another great point that Daniel brings up is how we can bring trauma into our relations. And this is something that I think we must all fall victim to. 99.99999% of us on this planet are certainly not enlightened people in a consistent state of self-transcendence. That's a very special and a very rare thing. And, there's maybe 13 greats in the world that have ever gotten to that point of self-realization. We're talking Jesus and Buddha and Ramana Maharshi and so forth. So
And
how do we use those traumas?
Could use a little bit of that worst case scenario thinking in that sense. It's just like, well, if I continue to act upon these traumas towards other people, worst case scenario is I ain't gonna have nobody else around me. I'm gonna be a horrible, pitiful mess. And then move through that and realize it's like, well, I do have
It's a
I have
beautiful
the ability
fear.
and strength
you know?
to figure out what the trauma is and want to go out there and find other people that can help me with this. Maybe it's people who have similar traumas, or people who are trained to recognize these things, like, your counselors and such. Well, you're good counselors, few and far between nowadays, but hey.
Yeah. There's something beautiful at the bottom of that fear of others not hearing or understanding us, which is our love for one another and how valuable we find one another to be, even if only subconsciously sometimes. It's really interesting how everything is truly love and the symptoms of the lack thereof, and that is the entirety of our experience. Now, I know that sounds very oversimplified, but if you think on it for a little while, you might just see that that is actually a very, very close approximation to what seems to be how we experience reality.
What is fear but the absence of love? First time you ever feel afraid is when you're an infant and you're taken away from your mother. That's why they usually howl and cry, because they're like, oh no, I'm cold and I'm not contained within this, you call it what you want, but this loving vessel that's holding you. And then, the first time we really intellectually understand fear is when we're ostracized from the group, whether it's the family group or the friends group, as a natural function of putting your baby down in the crib to go to sleep, or as a punishment for not behaving the way you should. So it's that separate, the separation from love is fear.
Is indeed fear. And think about how we're always trying to fill that void, that all these things, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, it's all us trying to fill the void that is left when we don't feel that great love in our hearts for whatever in the world. It could be other people, it could be the landscapes, the nature, our interactions, our creations, but coming from and embodying, orienting oneself through love seems to be the cure for everything that we're looking for. If you operate through this orientation, we're most likely to be in our optimal state, most likely to find those cures and solutions that we're looking for. When we're in that space of fear, we're clammed up, we're overstressed, the processing of the mind is being taken up by all of these different worried considerations that are rattling through our minds, and we don't have the space to see the potential avenues that we could get to if we were coming from a place of post cynical, post naive optimism. So that kind of optimism that Daniel speaks of is something that can only occur once we have looked at the darkness of the world and the darkness within ourselves and loved it and recognized it for what it is, and then recognized that the fact that we're upset over any of it shows that there actually is a great love and a care and a worthwhileness to everything and everyone around us. And then you can flip and you can realize, oh, wait, I'm in the middle of a great miracle once again. I'm in the midst of this story that we all get to write together. And yeah, it sure is super suspenseful and hella concerning at this time, but we are in one of those climaxes of the story, it seems. And so it's no wonder that things are the way they are, but look at the great potentials and look at what is already so perfect and beautiful that is already here and now.
Yep. Well,
We are miracle makers.
and fall in love with the process, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Dig it like that. Yeah.
I know there's probably some wise guy who said, love your suffering. There's probably been a lot of wise guys, and by suffering, I don't just mean pain, but that threat of being shaken apart from your unbalances as well. And that's one of those tricky things where love not being like a good feeling emotional state, but more of a way of being state.
Mm-hmm.
You're not having the emotion of love, you're being the experience of love.
Ah, man, that's
right?
yes, exactly. Amen. Amen. So now we're
Something
gonna
like
look at another clip here where Daniel discusses ego drivers and also the transcendent potential that is within us all. So there's, of course, healthy and unhealthy aspects of ego. So dig into that now a little bit.
Ego has a role in life. We have individuated senses of self. It has a role. If one doesn't have transcendent experiences of connectedness to everything that are not mediated through words and mediated through their name and mediated through being a human with a gender and a language, if you don't have a transcendent experience of that type that includes but transcends the ego, you need to work on that, because you can't actually do the right kind of work only from the ego place. Ultimately, without this biosphere, I'm nothing at all. So but my ego doesn't include the biosphere. Hey, what's in it for me? How do I get ahead? Whatever. And yet I don't fucking exist without all the stuff that I depend upon that isn't included in my little sense of self, which means I can harm things that I depend upon in service of this little myopic thing. And so one needs to have a sense of life, the interconnectivity of all of it that's actually embodied. This is the purpose of any kind of mystical, spiritual. It doesn't require weird beliefs. It's actually not about beliefs at all. Beliefs mess it up. It's about experience of consciousness not mediated through the semantic, and a transcendent connectivity associated with that. You can have that without any beliefs.
Yeah,
man.
You'll still come back to having an ego, come out of that most transcendent experience, whether it's through meditation, vision questing, ayahuasca, whatever, and then you'll still have an ego. And so any model that shames the ego and says it's a bad thing we need to get rid of just puts us at eternal conflict with ourself, because it's a dimension of ourself. The ego is, the mind is, the emotions are. So they all have an evolutionary purpose. It's just how do we tend to them and integrate them? So a healthy ego doesn't fuck the hole for itself, right? It actually subordinates to higher self. It's an important thing.
Realizes its position.
Insofar as the ego wants belonging and wants esteem and those types of things, it wants it from things that are actually aligned with its highest values and aligned with long-term interest rather than short-term interest. So it's not hypernormal stimuli.
Yes. Really like that.
And something just popped into my head, but there's this, in the new agey kind of stuff, this questing for ego death, and you're not killing the ego as an enemy. You're giving it a blessing by allowing it to die and then be reborn again, and allowing it to die and be reborn again. And we should all do that every day in one way or another. Letting the worst portions of ourselves die, and then rebirthing the better portions of ourselves out of that. Every day when you go to sleep, you die.
Yes, because ego is a tool that we all operate through. The great problem, and I remember picking this up from a gentleman named John Sherman, which taught self-inquiry practice. And he had this way of putting it that the cause of all problems in the world is a misidentification. We think that we are our egos instead of just recognizing that we have egos. We all have personalities. Um, and that feels like a completely normal thing to say. It's not that I am my personality, I have a personality. And then inquire into who is the you that has the personality. Because you'll notice it is descriptionless. It is a pure state of beingness that no word can encapsulate. And it is the blissful, peaceful state of home that awaits us all the deeper we delve into and cultivate the capacity to recognize what we all are truly, which is this great, continually unfolding mystery.
Yeah, and I when I was talking over him while he was talking, brought up that ego you should work with your ego so it knows its place within the ecology of your environment, because that's what it's there for. It's there to differentiate you from your environment so you can place yourself within it and come to grasp, to conform form around your
Mhm.
environment. And that goes with people too. Like, the blessing portion of the ego, like how every trauma has a blessing, the ego has a blessing. That allows us to be separate beings from each other so we can have this conversation.
Yeah,
we
so
can
we can
watch
communicate.
Schmachtenberger
Yeah.
and see his insights and then
Plan, manage together.
apply
Yeah.
them to ourselves,
Mhm.
because if we were just all having the same thought,
Right.
well, it would just be one thing, and we need multiple thinkers together doing this,
Because each is going to bring their own innovative, original ideas.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That's
So we're like a lot of players in an orchestra that can come together as an orchestra and not be over-identified the fact that we are players. Just recognize that that is a great role that we all get to embody and act through. So personage, cast
Yeah.
image.
well, the timpani player is not jealous of the violin player.
Mhm.
They work together, and to create this beautiful existence we have.
Yes.
And I've been thinking a lot about this in a theological sense. It's like, well, God. Okay, God is the perfect thing. It's not a thing, but you know what I mean. Why would there be something like Satan, which ego exists in the archetypical realm of Satan? It's the separator between things. It's the things that pull you away. Why would that have to be if God wants what's best for us? Well, maybe what's best for us isn't as simple as just handing it to us on a platter, but affording all possibilities, good, bad, ugly, everything in between.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
because it gives us a playing ground through which we can perfect the art of loving, and we can come to know ourselves as extensions of that great mystery through that process.
Hmm.
You know,
It's almost like, like going on a hike, like, okay, say there's this grand vista that has a beautiful view of a valley and it has a road going up to it in a parking lot. You can just drive up there and go, oh, this is beautiful and that was fun or whatever. Or you can hike it and it's miserable and grueling. It's like a 10-mile hike and, rocks and rough and mosquitoes and all this stuff. But once you get up there, you get this really profound sense of like accomplishment, and it almost makes the vista even more beautiful than it would be if you just went up there.
and there's so much more
Yeah.
detail that you can experience when you hike up rather than drive up
Yeah.
as well. With every step, you're going to be seeing
So
everything
I
around
think
you.
that's the healthy function of the ego, is to facilitate that kind of experience, that individual moving through
Mhm.
experience, and it can be useful in groups, but then the idea is not to over attach to it, because then the ego gets offended. The
Yes.
ego gets mad.
Yes.
The
ego is
thinks I'm
just a
better
tool.
than you.
It's something that we operate through. It's a vehicle
Well, like what
for our beingness.
he was saying,
But it's
well,
not what we are.
Yeah.
We just have an ego.
yeah, and it's a tool. Yeah,
But we constantly think we are our egos.
Yeah.
When someone says something cruel or something you disagree with, it's offensive. And who is being offended but the ego?
Hmm.
It's not the actual state of beingness itself, because beingness is literally just the feeling of here.
Yeah.
Being alive in this moment without any descriptions upon it. That's what we truly are, without all of the conditioning, the layers of conditioning laden over it that we see and operate through.
Yeah, and what he was saying about, okay, well, the time for hammering's done and I need to cut something.
Mm-hmm.
You need to use different tools for different jobs, and the ego has a very specific set of jobs that it does. And, well, yeah, I can bust apart a piece of wood with a hammer, but I really need a precise cut. So, or like kicking the board in half. I can kick the board in half, but, I can't really build a door out of a kicked in half board. I kind of need to cut the board precisely. So I need to use a different set of tools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. We can harm those things that we depend on. So finding a way to transcend our attachment and identification with the ego is how we can allow the ego to operate in a healthful manner in the world, and we can cultivate a sense and remember that sense of interconnection with everything and everyone around us, because we truly are inexorably a part of this whole process that we call a universe. We feel that we are separate, but I don't exist without the sun. I don't exist without the earth and the food that I ingest and the air that I breathe in. So, what am I? What are we really? It's a great mystery, and it's something that you can meditate on. And that mystery is never going to solve itself, but there's always going to be a deeper grokking of it nonetheless. It's really hard to explain, but we do find a great peace from recognizing that we are not our ego, and we don't have to be so offended about everything that is said to us or every point of disagreement that we run into.
Yeah, and sometimes it really doesn't feel good to put the ego away, because sometimes it does feel good to get angry about something and talk about it and get into that ego mode. And sometimes it's appropriate. Like if really you've had a bad day and you just want to let it out, you got a good friend or a good partner around you that can put their ego aside enough just to
hear you
hear
out
you
while you're
talk
in that
about
space
Becky
of
at
being
work and
overwhelmed. Yeah.
like all that stuff. And
Yeah.
then once you get it out, be like, okay, well, what's really the issue? Bam.
Yes. Yes. I like that. That's good.
Sorry for
That is,
Becky's at work. It's just the first name that came to my head. So.
Sorry, Becky.
Yeah.
Becky's the new
I know a
Karen.
few good. I know quite a few good Beckys.
Okay, so now we're going to look at healthy ego drivers.
Ah,
Jump on over.
we pre-segued.
So if there's a part of me that wants recognition, it would be better to think about things like, what will I feel best that I had spent my life on my deathbed? And how do I want the people who are gathered when I'm dead thinking about me, about who I was as a person and who I was to them and how I interacted, how I touched them, and those types of things? That's still ego motive. It's just an ego motive that, because it is relational and because it has more duration, ends up being less problematic than just visualizing myself getting the Nobel Prize or whatever the nearer term, less holistic consideration is. So you can watch, like, a way you can tell this isn't happening. So like, let's say I'm focused on X risk. I want people to be nurses. Like there are people who are going through existential risk themselves this moment. They're in the process of dying or about to die, or their kid is, right? And it's like, it's everything that is sacred about the big picture in a microcosm embodied now. And I can't help that, but that nurse can, or that person who's doing rescue work with dogs in the pound or the whatever it is. Like, I want everyone bringing that full depth of love to whatever is theirs to do. So I can tell if I'm in a conversation with someone, do I listen to the thing they're into and get fascinated by it and get proud about it and get wrapped and want to support it and not need to talk about my thing? Do I talk about my thing in a way that actually makes what they're doing possibly seem less important even to them? If so, that's an asshole thing I got to fix.
Yep.
There's a million things like this. It's kind of, if I have big control issues, I might be very interested in designing the future because I want to feel like I have control in the biggest possible thing I want to have control in. I want to feel like I can bend the world to my will or whatever it is. It very much Alexander the Great, Napoleon, conqueror kind of mentality applied in this domain. It's like, there's a lot to be very concerned about in those spaces. So these are a few things about dispositions, egoic dispositions, trust dispositions, fear dispositions, that catastrophizing ones that might attract us to the space, but might also mess up how we show up there. And so what we would do is say, how do I inventory these and how do I work on them? What therapists can I work with? What practices can I do? And also, who can I be in close relationship with that I can trust, where they can help check me on the shit and I ask for that and I can help check them on stuff. So
others.
can we, because the definition of a blind spot is I can't see it.
Yes.
So there's going to be stuff in the way that I'm showing up where I think that I showed up pretty well, and they're like, "No, you totally seemed like an arrogant asshole," or "No, you seemed really disconnected and way more interested in your own stuff than anyone else." I'm like, I didn't know, and so I need people that I trust to give me feedback, and I need to want to hear it, and I need to make it really safe for them to give me that.
There's also the inverse.
I
you
won't
think
always
you
agree.
messed
It might
up
be
and
some
they're
of their
telling you,
truth.
nah, it was actually pretty
I
good.
should take it really seriously and err on the side of trying to agree and trying it on.
Yeah. So that's great. I like that he brought that in at the end there.
Yeah. So when like the the positive ego driver thing, you want your politicians to have your politicians and your leaders to have a healthy ego in the sense of they want to be loved and appreciated, but not so much of an ego where they won't listen. Just enough where they're like, look, okay, well, I
wanna
want
do a
to
good
know
job.
what you feel because I want you to like me and I want to be remembered on my deathbed or hundreds of years later in the future as being, good, good
Yeah.
at whatever I was doing.
Yeah, positive ego motivations. Right?
Yeah, opposed to like, you don't want your leader to have an unhealthy ego where they're just like, well, I'm going to be the tyrant and I don't care how history views me because might is right and all I care about is power. We already went through that as a species probably multiple times, but most recently, World War I, World War II, and in various parts in the world at different times within the last 150 years or so, we've seen what the unhealthy egos of leaders does. Whereas, like you can't get rid of your leader's ego. Every leader, every politician, every person you work with is going to have an ego, but we can foster the healthier usage of it. Okay, well, everybody deep down, I don't care who you are, actually really does want to be loved. So,
Yep.
not to be the manipulative type, but we can manipulate our politicians and our leaders to be like, look, we'll give you love. You just got to do good by us.
Yeah. Well,
And
we
you
can
gotta
positively manipulate in ways such as inspiration. We can inspire
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
others.
Yeah.
We can basically lift up those that do good things in the world, hold that up as a standard, celebrate that, and then when people fail before it becomes quite obvious. And so we can know better who to trust and how to encourage those, more favorable dispositions.
Yeah, and like when he was talking about, finding people that you can be comfortable with to say, check your ego. You're thinking it's like, yeah, it was pretty good, but you got to have like a good friend to tell you it's like, nah, actually, like say like if you're in a band, I'm a musician, so I'm going to put this in a band. You can have somebody that's like, oh yeah, I felt like I played, really well or whatever, and you got to tell them it's like, well, you're a little drunk and it was kind of sloppy and you're a rushing. So, and if they don't trust you or their ego gets a little too big on that and they're gonna be like, well, you telling me I'm rushing while you're dragging, and that's an unhealthy relationship. Whereas if you can like, and I know this personally because like the vast majority of the musicians I've ever worked with, like directly, we can have these conversations where it's just like, they're like, well, I thought I did okay, and it's like, yeah, no, I thought you did okay, but I think doing this another way could help. I'm not entirely certain maybe what the other way is, or hey, practice this, or use the metronome, or let me give you a little bit of advice from what I've been through because I was in the inverse of this relationship at another period of time, and let me give some respect to the people that kind of told me, practice, or whatever it is. But yet again, it comes down to an honest, high trust relationship.
Yep.
And ultimately, we'd like our societies to be like that, so we can always be checking in with each other, in a maybe not always in a healthy way, but in a way that we know on average gets us better results than if we were just going it alone. Because a single man is no society.
That's right.
A single individual is no researcher. Like you can have one person researching, but they're citing research from a lot of other people and using methods, and every method has a name that's named after somebody who came up with the
We're all
method.
building on everything that came before us. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Or
So a little
you're-
bit of humility, a willingness to hear constructive criticism, and to forge the kind of relationships where we welcome and encourage that from one another, the trust and the understanding to be able to hear it and not be angry about it, even though sometimes it might hurt a little bit to hear something like that. just to recognize that it's coming from a place of love really helps soften the blow. And ultimately we realize, oh wait, I'm lifting up those around me. You know, we're engaged in a partnership here that is built on a foundation of trust that wants to see the best of one another come forth. And that's a beautiful thing to be engaged in. I really like that. That Daniel shared that aspect of it as well. Here, this is how we can at least find a way to more reasonably orient ourselves as we work on these great existential risks. And now we're going to turn to Daniel Schmatchenberger's talk at the Emergence Festival some years back, but this was such a beautiful talk where he talks about the miracle of what is known as the law of emergence. So we're going to end things on a very bright and inspirational note here, guys.
I'm actually surprised it wasn't as doomy as I thought it was going to be at the beginning of this. I was expecting us to get pretty doomy, but
right. Well, you know, whenever you're actually actively engaging with the things that are concerning in the world, and you find that there is a constructive way to approach it, all of a sudden, it's actually quite relieving. Is like, oh wait, there's something I can hold on to here that is actionable, that I can actually practice and cultivate a capacity for.
Yeah, even if it is kind of doomy, if you feel like you've gone through the process and you've figured it out a little bit better, you still may be in the doomy area, but you don't feel so don't feel so full of dread.
Yeah. Well, it's even doomier when you have a murky view of what's going on in the world and there is no clear picture. When we look at the demon in the face, then we can actually see how to overcome it. But if we are constantly afraid of it and we don't look closely, then it has so much more control over us, and it does indeed fill us with dread. It's like, you know, in a horror movie, when the bad guy has a mask on, you can't see his features. That unknown nature of what is going on behind it, what is it thinking? I can't see its expressions. That is so scary for us. The unknown is quite intimidating. So,
and well, we have a natural genetic response that's very primate of us to say point out the snake and show it to everybody else, and we do that as a community. This thing's terrifying, but point it out, make a lot of noise, and point the thing so we can all look at the snake, identify it, figure out what to do about it together,
and everyone's aware of it that could possibly get hurt.
So that's already built into us as a species.
Yeah, it's cool that we have that.
Hiding from it, like imagine like in the, you know who's going to get stabbed by the slasher because like they'll run and they'll hide and they'll like put their back up to the door or something like that, and the slasher's behind the freaking door. It's like, well, you don't want to put your back to it. You want to turn around and make sure you got the door in your sights and maybe be ready for it. You know, not hide from it. Look it in the eye and hit it with the shovel.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're jumping on over to this last clip now. This one is going to be a little bit longer. I do have everything sped up today at 1.25 speed. I hope it's comfortable for y'all to listen to, but I didn't want the episode to drag on too long. It's a lot of information that we're taking in. Let's go check this out. Bada boom.
All the buttons.
There we go.
What I want to talk about today is what emergence is as a phenomena, as a property that's actually essential to understand the nature of the universe we live in, and that's actually essential to understand what it means to be human, and that is essential for understanding the basis for meaning, for ethics, for existentialism, and then also what that portends for the future of civilization and addressing some of the things that are concerning and that are exciting. Okay, so you can consider the next 20 minutes or however long this is as kind of an extemporaneous, rambling ode to emergence itself, right? A kind of love talk about how cool it is that the universe actually has this property and that we can understand it and participate with it. So let's start by defining what is emergence. Emergence means something new arises that wasn't here before, right? We all kind of have that sense intuitively. But scientifically, how the fuck does that happen? How do you bring particles or planets or anything together and all of a sudden the whole has some properties that none of the parts had? Like, where do they come from? Which is why in the fields of science that study emergence, which evolutionary theory and biology and system science and complexity theory study it, it's considered the closest thing to magic that's actually a scientifically kind of admissible term, but it's still sketchy, right, in terms of really understanding how this thing works. And because how do we get fundamentally new things out of relationships of things where that didn't exist before? Right? This is fascinating. How do you have a cell that respirates made up of molecules, none of whom respirate? And so it's just really interesting when you actually think about this, right? We have a paired term. Does anyone know what the term is that is key in understanding synergy? And emergence is synergy. Synergy and emergence are two sides of the same phenomena. Synergy means whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. Emergence is what is that greater? It is what is the new stuff that emerges out of bringing things together. And so synergy is more formally defined as properties of whole systems that aren't found in any of the parts taken separately, which also means that are fundamentally unpredicted by the parts taken separately, which portends a future that is fundamentally, ontologically unpredictable from the current state of the future, which is very different than a mechanistic clock unfolding Newtonian understanding of the future, and yet still actually makes sense in terms of scientific law. Super interesting, right? So synergy is this property of relationship where the whole has new properties that the parts didn't have. So emergence is a result of synergy. Synergy is a result of relationship. Does that make sense? And relationship is a result of attractive forces.
Yes.
There are some kinds of attractive forces, whether it's gravity, bringing dust together into planets, or planets together into solar systems, whether it's electromagnetism, bringing subatomic particles together into atoms, or the strong force, bringing quarks together into protons. Each of those are emergent properties driven by synergy, driven by relationship, driven by attraction, or whether it's bringing these people together via pheromones, or love, or intellectual affinity, or a topic that we're all interested in, like creating a better world. There's some attractive forces. And so Bucky Fuller called love metaphysical gravity. In the same way that gravity and physical forces act on physical bodies to attract them, we have metaphysical forces that act on metaphysical bodies to drive attraction. But think about, so imagine if you think about all of the attractive forces as expressions of a fundamental principle of universe of allurement, that there is a principle by which separate things have reason to come together that offers advantage that being separate doesn't have. And you think about all of the forces as special case applications of that. Imagine if that wasn't the case. Imagine if we had a universe where allurement wasn't a fundamental principle of it. And the whole thing would have stopped at quantum foam, right? You have quantum foam emerge, you don't even quite get to the point of subatomic particle, and that's it, because nothing attracts to then have synergy and emergent properties. I have a friend and collaborator, Mark Gaffney, who calls this universe a love story. Why at the heart of the evolutionary story is this love story, which is that it's actually attraction driving the whole fucking evolutionary story, right? Attraction driving relationship, driving synergy, driving new emergent properties, driving net novelty and new creation, and the arrow of evolution. So we can actually understand the arrow of evolution itself in terms of this set of phenomena together. Does that make sense? So then evolution in complexity theory is defined most generally in terms of more elegantly ordered complexity. That's actually the best definition we have in terms of mathematical complexity theory coming out of Santa Fe Institute. The definition has the word elegance built right in it, because it's, again, one of these actually fairly mysterious properties, but that's key to it, which is bringing things together doesn't give you emergent properties. Bringing them together in a particularly elegantly ordered way does. So think about all the parts that make up a cell, right? You've got all these non-living parts. DNA and cell nucleus structures and all the different organelles and cytoplasm, and they're all not living. And then the cell is living. But if you brought all those parts together but you didn't arrange them as a cell, it was just a bunch of molecules, it wouldn't be that interesting, right? It'd just be goo. If you took the 50 trillion cells that made you and you didn't arrange them exactly this way and you just had like 150 pounds worth of cells, it would be much less interesting. Even though there'd be just as much complexity, you wouldn't have an order in the complexity where the emergent property comes. That's actually the relationship. It's not just heaps coming together. It's not just complexity, it's wholes. And the difference between a whole and a heap is order, and a specific set of patterns of order. This means not every relationship is synergistic. Some relationships are entropic. They actually create the opposite direction of new emergent properties. They destroy some properties that were already there, right? Almost everyone has some examples. But you can bring chemicals together that, rather than self-organizing to create higher ordered molecules with new thermodynamic properties, they have an exothermic entropic reaction and they drop to lower levels of organization, right? This is true at all levels. So it's not just relationship, it's specific kinds of relationship that maximize synergy. This is a key thing to understand about the nature of the universe. It's also the case that if you bring the same thing together, a bunch of the same thing, you don't get very interesting synergies. You get very interesting synergies when you bring different things with different properties together in the right format, where then you have the properties of each of those things and then the properties of the relationship between those, which is the new stuff. And you get emergent. So you've got hydrogen and you've got oxygen, which are different things. And you bring them together and you get water in the basis for life, but neither hydrogen nor oxygen at room temperature are liquids, right? And so this is a fascinating thing. So we're actually very interested in having deep synergistic relationships with differences that lead to fundamentally new emerging properties. So it's not just net complexity, it's ordered complexity, and it's elegantly ordered complexity. And then when you get a new property, then universe selects for that, right? That new property offers some evolutionary advantage to that system that a system that didn't have that wouldn't have. So things can come together all kinds of ways, but the ones that come together most synergistically offer and confer the most advantage, and universe selects for it. So universe is actually selecting for more differences right? So it's selecting for diversity and then more synergistic combinations across those differences and it's both of those, more diversity and more unification across the diversity, right? More agency and more symbiosis at the same time is what defines the era of evolution. Does that make sense? Things that are separate, autonomous agents, right? So like a cell, you can think of as having its own agency, right? Its own ability to act and its own boundary and periphery. But you bring a bunch of cells together, and this collection of cells can reflect on consciousness and existentialism and have a conversation like this, even though none of those cells on their own do that, right? And it's different kinds of cells. You couldn't do that with just neurons. It takes neurons and glial cells and immune cells and stem cells, et cetera, to all come together. So more agency, more differentiation, more orderly relationship, more synergy, all of that comes together, and the net defining thing is emergence. How much fundamental new advantage arises, and that's what evolution selects for. And so if it wasn't for this whole combination of things together, is this the message that says 5 minutes left? Fascinating. So, high five. So I'll see if we can go very quickly through. That was the first 1% of what I hoped to discuss. So I'm going to just skim over the top of a bunch of topics and hopefully paint a gestalt, at least, of an arc that's interesting. So the evolutionary universe story, the kind of new best story of universe we have emerging from the intersection of all the sciences, is that we have an evolutionary universe that doesn't require a creator, agent, deistic or theistic God to create, but is also not just random, highly improbable set of movements that get us here, but there's a set of properties that give us a self-organizing, rather than creative agent, creative principle universe that is moving towards more elegant ordered complexity. And with that story on the physical, you also have the evolution of consciousness structures themselves, right? As you move from a reptilian nervous system to the increased orderly complexity of a mammalian and then a neocortical and then a prefrontal nervous system, you move from the kinds of sentience that map to that of pain, pleasure at reptilian to emotional, to cognition, to abstraction. So we have a universe that's moving in the direction of not only more elegance, but greater depths and breadth of consciousness itself. Now, this defines an era of evolution that reifies meaning in a very interesting way. And one of the things that's so interesting is with our capacity for abstraction, we can not just think about our experiential self of the moment, but we can think about ourselves in abstract terms. We can think about time abstractly, deep past and deep future, right? And that is what allows us to actually understand evolution itself. It's an understanding of deep past and fossil record and astrophysics that give us a sense of the ability to abstract laws of how that change occurs over time that allows us a deeper insight as to how we got here, and then also the ability to vision a future fundamentally more beautiful and more interesting, and then be part of that creative process. So it's worthwhile just noting that our prefrontal cortex and our capacity for abstraction is a pretty new phenomena evolutionarily, right? And it's also a very powerful set of capabilities. And when you have a new phenomena that's very powerful, you're not going to know how to use it that well. Many of its applications will be destructive until you figure it out. So we can think about the future as worry. We can think about the past as regret. We can think about self abstractly in terms of negative self-comparison. So then we have spiritual ideals emerge that basically say this is all bad, right? Mind and the ability for abstraction like this is bad. We should not think about the future at all or think about the past and just be in the moment like the other animals and children are, see how happy they are. But it's a regressive spirituality that is actually rejecting the fundamentally novel human capability that emerged rather than say, let's learn how to use it well for its evolutionary purposes in a fundamentally evolving universe. So if we learn how to use it well, then we say, how can we learn from the past, how universe works, to be able to imagine a future in an omni-considerate way that has fundamentally less suffering and higher quality of life across all meaningful quality of life metrics for all life, right? That is omni-considerately true, good, and beautiful. And then how can we apply all that learning now to actually help create that world? And in doing so, we stop just being a part of the whole. But in our ability to think about the whole and think about the direction of the whole, we can actually become an agent for the whole. And this is fucking huge, right? The bee is serving this huge role in evolution by pollinating the plants that make the atmosphere, that make us, but they don't know they're doing that and they can't consciously figure out how to do it better. But we actually have the capability of looking at what the whole story is and identifying as, whoa, the whole evolutionary impulse of universe brought me about and then woke up to itself in me. And so in a meaningful way, I am actually the evolutionary impulse of universe awoke to itself in a form that has adequate ordered complexity to contemplate that and then get to consciously choose how to participate with it to be in a, not just aboard Spaceship Earth, but crew, right? To help steer the direction of evolution and cosmos. And so we move from evolution as a mostly unconscious algorithmic process that selects for dominance now to a process that can be mediated by conscious agents that can actually forecast a more beautiful future and select to help create that. Does that make sense? So when we don't identify as evolutionaries, then we can be actually we identify as nouns rather than verbs, and we stay stuck where we're at, and then we need pain as an evolutionary driver, and then emergence through emergency is how we grow. As soon as we identify with the inexorability of evolution and ourselves as evolution incarnate. We stop needing pain to push us because our whole fucking purpose for being, for becoming, becoming are actually matched. They're two sides of the same thing, is the lure of the becoming, is the bringing about more of the timeless properties of the infinite in time, right? More of the infinite through the finite. This actually becomes the basis of our existence. And everybody knows that when you are in the experience of creating beauty that didn't exist before in universe, that adds to universe, that's uniquely yours to create, you feel a kind of aliveness that's not matched by anything else.
Oh.
In lieu of not doing that, the emptiness causes all kinds of addiction, right? Because that's fundamental to what we're actually here to do. Now, when we all identify as evolutionaries, we obsolete the need as pain for a driver. Does that make sense? Because we have a pull driver rather than just needing the push driver. When we also identify as fundamentally interconnected parts of a interconnected universe rather than separate things, we stop thinking that there is any definition of success for self that isn't a definition of success for the whole. And we stop thinking that the idea of advantaging ourselves at the expense of something else we're inexorably interconnected to makes sense at all. So we are all agents for an interconnected whole where our sense of self is actually an emergent property of the intersection of this system with the rest of the universe. It's actually key in terms of emergence. Your self is an emergent property of the whole universe. Because even though you wouldn't exist in the same way without your brain and your body, you also wouldn't exist without the atmosphere. And the trees that make it, and the plants and bacteria that make it, and the gravity and electromagnetism and foundational forces. Like the concept of I separate from universe is a misnomer. Does that make sense? So the concept of a life path for ourself that isn't a life path for universe is a misnomer, or advantage for self. So then we get, in the deepest sense, when Einstein said the idea that there are separate things is an optical delusion of consciousness. And in reality, there is one reality that we call universe, of which we are all inextricably interconnected facets. And your experience of self is a facet of that. Now, what's so fucking fascinating is that it is interconnected with all of it. It's an expression of the foundation of all of it, and it's also completely unique in all of the universe. It's a unique facet, non-fungibly unique, right? What that means is you have something to offer universe in your experience and your creativity that no one else has to offer exactly that way, which means if you don't offer it, like if Salvador Dali hadn't done Dali, Michelangelo didn't do Dali, Escher wouldn't have done Dali, Dali just wouldn't have happened. And so universe would have been fundamentally less. So when you get that, your own self-actualization is compulsory, right? You have an obligation to it. But then when you get that everyone else, if they don't self-actualize, universe is less, your participation with helping everyone else self-actualize is also compulsory. So competition is an obsolete concept. Symbiotic, so remember, universe moves towards more differentiation, more novelty, and then more symbiosis across that novelty for more emergence. And what we're moving towards is a civilization where everyone actually identifies this way, as a emergent property of the whole, as an interconnected part of universe with a unique role to play, with unique synergies with all the other unique roles to play. And then with that synergy, with that human participation, then humanity actually becomes a thing. It actually becomes an emergent property. Right now it's an idea, but we don't have humanity, we don't have civilization, we have humans bumping, right? Yeah. We have a bunch of organelles that haven't organized as a cell that starts breathing, right? You don't have behavior of the whole that is centrally and consciously self-organizing. But we can. And I would actually say, and this is what I wanted to have more time to get into, but to just foreshadow quickly, if we cherry pick from the huge data sets about where humanity is going right now, we can see that things are exponentially changing, which means changing at more and more rapid and more significant rates. And you can cherry pick metrics where things are getting exponentially better, and that's true, and other things are getting exponentially worse, and that's also true. Which means the future that you predict, if you just follow any of those curves, is not happening. If things are getting exponentially better and worse at the same time, does everybody kind of get that that's happening on different metrics? Yes. Then that doesn't mean things are getting better or worse. It means the current system is destabilizing. And that means self-terminating. And then we either have a discrete phase shift to a lower order entropic system or the emergence of a higher order system that is foundationally different than the current system we have in every way. So the things getting better are the pieces that can be reorganized to create a new civilization with a foundationally new structure, right? Biosphere metrics are getting exponentially worse from misapplication of technology. Technology's right application are making things fundamentally better, but technology is giving us the capacity to do things like have data analytic capabilities to inventory all the world's resources, to then be able to allocate all the world's resources to meet all the world's needs with optimum efficiency. We never had that ability before. Like the transportation and communication technologies that can actually make us a global civilization. We never had that before, right? And so the technological capacities that require us to step up, otherwise we, self-extinction is a very real thing, also make possible a discrete phase shift in evolution that's characterized by three major things. And this will be where I end. At the level of social systems, primarily economics, the key shift we're going to move to is moving from a differential advantage economy. It's defined by private ownership, valuation based in scarcity, and differential advantage, to an economic system that is defined by making sure that the incentive of every agent and the well-being of every other agent and the commons is perfectly aligned with no externality. Meaning we actually understand that it's an interconnected system, we identify all the externalities and internalize them, so the system's actually defined by systemic advantage for the whole. This is not communism or socialism or capitalism. It's something that was not possible before to even anticipate. But it is how your body works, where none of the cells are advantaging themselves at the expense of the other. They're doing what's best for them, what's best for the whole, symbiotically at the same time, right? And so that's the key net shift at the level of macroeconomics and correspondingly governance and all of our social structures. At the level of infrastructure in the built world, we're moving from a linear materials economy where we extract from the earth at ever-growing rates unsustainably from finite resources and then turn it into trash, to a closed-loop materials economy where the trash is the new stuff. We stop extracting from the earth, stop producing waste, and we actually have a post-growth, negative entropy, closed-loop materials economy where we can live ongoingly at progressively higher and higher quality of life sustainably with the biosphere. So that's the infrastructure shift, that's the social structure shift, and the superstructure, the mimetic shift, is this awareness of all of us as facets of one integrated, self-evolving reality where the well-being of everyone, the well-being of everyone else, the well-being of the commons are not meaningfully calculable separate from each other. Now, what's so interesting is there used to be such a thing as local problems. When Gandhi was working with Home Rule for India, it was largely thought of as an Indian problem, and it didn't directly affect everybody, right? When people in the U.S. wanted to, or who founded the U.S. wanted to leave British Empire, there was somewhere else to go. And it was a local problem. Right now, when we deal with species extinction and ocean acidification and peak nitrogen, peak phosphorus, they're all global issues, and you can't solve them without China and without India and without the U.S. and without everyone participating. So the idea that we have local issues is gone. Our level of global infrastructure and technology is made to where we have all global issues. And they're actually existential. They are threatening of the biosphere. No one has ever had issues in the history of humanity that threatened the ability of the species to continue. Nor did they have ones that they had to face eminently in short term, nor did they have the capacity to actually face those kinds of things. The data science, the technology that could build something fundamentally new. What that means is we have the most significant work that humanity has ever had, with the most significant capabilities, which also means the most potential to impact the biggest picture that any humans have ever had.
Sorry.
And it's easy to think about that and then get caught back into like shit you got to do next as part of to win at the current system that is going extinct. But winning at a system that is obsoleting the capability of life on Earth to continue, winning at a dying system is not an interesting win, right? If you ever think about the definition of heaven, where you're in heaven and there are people in hell and you're happy, you have to be a psychopath. You have to be able to separate from the experience of other sentient things enough that you can be totally stoked with that level of suffering. Well, the idea in this world that the level of intensity of suffering that's happening can be happening and you can just be stoked because you're killing it in your life, you have to be mildly psychopathic.
Yep.
If we want to not be psychopaths, then there is no definition for success for ourselves. It is not definition of success for everything. And now when we start really taking that seriously, fucking everything changes. And then you start saying, well, what can I actually do to make my life of greatest use to all life?
What is your purpose?
And then your answer to that question, if you take it seriously and really study and really work on it and don't just like ask the question, get overwhelmed, give up, and go back to current stuff, your progressively better answer to that question will lead to the emergence of your life meaning and dharma and path. And correspondingly, the emergence of civilization making it. That's it.
Freaking rad. Oh my God. Go ahead, Schmatchenberger. That was on point. Thank God for that, gentleman.
Well, and so what he was talking about there at the end with, global societies and people having to, like we need to behave more like the cells in the body, opposed to just get it myself and I'll be fine and everything. Well, the people who came up with socialism and communism and fascism and national socialism were trying to do very much that, but without the
with a
understanding
blame the
of the
outside
whole
kind of methodology
yeah,
too.
and also a lot
Yes.
of times just like if it's fascism or national socialism, it's just for our group, right?
Yes.
And if it was communism, it's like, well, it's just our way,
Yeah.
and everybody has to do it.
It's their fault. If we can change the game and get them out of the way, then we can achieve the
Yeah.
thing that we hope
Well,
for
it's
ourselves.
top down versus bottom up.
Yes, yes,
if,
yeah, there you
if
go.
You have more people realizing, their worth and what they can do, and so their worth and what they can do, and what their relationship is with the world, and what their purpose is in life, and really truly doing that Well, and if we encourage more and more people to do that, and we all just start getting into the habit of doing that, we'll be far better off, and we won't need a top-down, tyrannical, totalitarian system to force us into what it thinks that goal is.
Yes, yes. How exciting to be at this point in history where the greatest things are possible. We have the technological capacity and the know-how to build new systems that can make the existing systems obsolete. This is something, like he said, that is not Marxism, not socialism, not even capitalism. It is how the cells in our bodies operate. Like DJ said, from the ground up, everything is in a state of synergy together to create the opportunity for more emergence. So we can identify as the interconnected parts of a whole, agents of an interconnected whole. Recognize that we are evolution itself that has become aware of itself, and we can fall in love with that process, the allure of becoming together. I love how he brought in being and becoming into it. I mean, that right there is a very short explication of what John Vervaeke was trying to put forth in The Meaning Crisis. And man, like, I don't even know how his brain does that, how he holds all of that, and he ordered it so elegantly as he just did.
Well, practicing and doing it for a long time.
Man. He's really looked hard at it, and with his whole heart. You can
And
tell.
consistently using the vocabulary as well. Like, you know,
Mhm.
the words you use definitely change the way you think, and not
Yes.
just what you think of, but how you think of it. That's why it's really important. Like, you know, one of the very prime things we learn is well, grammar and words and definitions of words, and then, you know, if you go advanced enough, the artistic way of putting them together to make a point. That's why we like really good writers and poets and stuff like that, because they can talk very much about these things, but not in a super dry way that's uninteresting. They can talk about it in an alluring kind
Quite
of
an
way that
intriguing,
pulls you
alluring way,
in.
Yes, yes.
Um,
It's elegantly ordered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's maximizing synergy. Yeah, I love this. The more diversity, the more opportunity for further unification. He spoke on how, of course, we experience the past with regretful thinking, the future with worrying thinking. Here and now is the place that we want to operate from. It's so easy to get mired in our thoughts and that ongoing inner monologue that is constantly trying to, it's like the ego, the brain trying to protect itself. Love as metaphysical gravity. And I wasn't familiar with that Buckminster Fuller quote, but I really like it. So we have to cultivate a sense of our interconnection. And that can only be done through cultivating a capacity for love, for loving this world no matter what.
And
There
there's
we find the cure, there we find the shield that we've been seeking, there we find the fulfillment that we've been reaching to all kinds of things outside of us to artificially fill, junk food TV, junk food itself, you know, our insecurities that we try and cover over and manage through the acquisition of things outside of us never quite fills the void. We have to find that love within, that sense of wonder. We have to awaken again. And without that sense of wonder, we can't see each other in this world for the miracle that it is that we are.
and it's something that can't be forced on other people. Like, you can't force somebody to see the wonder in something. Now,
You
you
only
might
inspire them.
you might be able to force them on the hike, and then at the end of it, they're like, "Wow,
Wow,
okay, I'm
thank
so
you."
glad that you forced me to do this." But like, you can't. That was, that's
But it wasn't a real force. It was like an encouragement, you
yeah,
kinda- yeah.
Well, sometimes it's your parents. When you're a kid, they got to force you to do
That's a good
stuff. But
point.
it,
There you go,
like
yeah.
it ends up being better off, and you end up being thankful for it if it's the
Mhm.
right kind of force, like the force.
Yes. So, guys, if you appreciated anything you've seen today, make sure that you like, subscribe, throw in some comments. If you have any thoughts or questions, help us reach more people out here with this work. And definitely look out for Daniel Schmatchenberger. He is all over the place. I don't think he has a channel of his own, but he is on many other people's channels. He's been having an ongoing conversation with economist Nate Hagen that has been fascinating. And he actually had an old talk on Rebel Wisdom that I covered in previous episodes of the podcast. If you look for the episodes titled Phase Shift, you'll find some other clips of Daniel Schmachtenberger and some deep dives into how we can approach this situation that our species finds itself in. And look forward to us continuing delving deep into this subject matter. Any final thoughts?
Just do it because only you can do it. Only you can do you and do what you does.
Right. There's a void in the world that only you can fill. No one else can. No one else will do what you are uniquely
And also,
designed for.
it's perfectly natural to feel dread
Mhm.
and to feel fear and to feel all these negative emotions that we're feeling.
But there's a
But
purpose for us all.
we can move past just the natural into, say, the supernatural. I don't mean like ghosts and stuff, but above and beyond natural. We are of evolution aware of itself.
Yes.
So feel your feelings, move through them, get with other people, actually discuss these issues, these crises together in a way that facilitates the creation of solutions, opposed to maybe just bitching and moaning, just the bitch and moan. Yeah, that's fun for a little bit, but doesn't give
Blaming,
you anywhere.
hating,
Yeah.
complaining
Yeah.
doesn't solve the problem. Yeah. So give it love.
Yep. Love yourself. Love the other. Love the people you don't like. Love the people you do like. It's all love, man.
That's it. That is the way forward for us.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Speaking of, we love you guys. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
And we will see you next time. Always Wednesday, 7 p. EST. Like and subscribe, fam. Get out there and like and subscribe. Everything that you see Daniel Schmachtenberger putting out there as well. And everybody else out there that is working hard to bring about positive change in this world. Talk to you guys soon.